Leo did not speak on the drive back. He sat in the rear seat of the car with his backpack on his lap and his hands folded the way they always were when he was managing something. Placed, deliberate, the architecture of a child who had learned that stillness was safer than reaction. He looked out the window. He did not look at the man in the front seat. He did not look at the street. He looked at the middle distance where you looked when you were not seeing anything outside of yourself because everything important was happening somewhere inside. He was 20 feet away. That was the thing that kept cycling through Naomi's mind as she sat beside him in the back of that car. 20 feet. The extraction attempt had happened at the side exit, the green one, the one Leo trusted, the one the network had mapped and targeted and chosen specifically because it was where Leo went when he felt safe. And Junwoo had arrived. His men had arrived. It had been stopped. Leo had not been touched, had not been taken, was sitting here breathing and present and physically unharmed. But he had been 20 feet away. And he had seen what happened in those 20 feet. The security detail had restrained one man. The other had run. Junwoo had done something in the space between those two facts, a space of maybe 8 seconds, that had been sufficient to ensure the running man did not get far. It had not been a clean, controlled neutralization. It had not been the professional, contained management of a threat that Junwoo could describe in neutral language at a table over coffee. It had been fast and fierce and raw, the action of a man who was not managing a situation but reacting to one, who had arrived at his son's school and found the thing he had spent 8 years trying to prevent standing 20 feet from his child, and had responded from a place below strategy and calculation. From the place where fathers lived. And Leo had seen it. All of it. 20 feet away, held at the arm by one of Junwoo's men, told to stay back, told not to look, and looking anyway, because he was 10 years old and his father was 20 feet away and there was nothing in him capable of not looking. They arrived at the apartment. Leo got out. He adjusted his backpack straps with the deliberate attention of someone who needed something mechanical to do with his hands. He walked to the elevator without waiting. He rode up without speaking. He went to his room and he closed the door and he did not come out. Junwoo stood in the living room. Naomi stood across from him. She said, "Give him time." He said, "How much time?" She said, "I don't know. But going in there right now is not going to help either of you." He looked at the closed door. She thought she had never seen him look so large and so helpless simultaneously. She said, "Tell me exactly what happened." He told her. It took 4 minutes. He told it without justification and without minimization, which she noted, which mattered. He described the extraction attempt, the response, the specific sequence of events in those 20 feet. He told her what he had done. He did not tell her he had had to do it. He did not tell her there was no other option. He told her what he had done and then he stopped. She said, "Was there another option?" A pause that lasted long enough to be its own answer. Then, "In that moment I was not looking for another option." She absorbed that. She said, "Junwoo, I need you to hear something." He looked at her. She said, "You have built everything around protecting Leo from the world outside. You have been meticulous about it. And I genuinely believe, that it has come from love. But what Leo just watched was not protection. What Leo just watched was his father become the thing that Leo's nightmares are made of. And the nightmares are not going to understand the justification." Silence. She kept going, because this needed to be said fully and she was not going to stop halfway. "Leo built a story about you. Children do this. They construct the version of their parent that they need in order to feel safe. His story was, my father is powerful enough to protect us, and that power is the thing that keeps me safe, and that is all that matters. That story has been working for him. It has been holding him together. And today, 20 feet from that side exit, he watched that story crack." Junwoo said nothing. She said, "The question is not whether you can keep him safe. The question is whether you can be his father. And those are not the same question." The room was very quiet. Then, from behind the closed door, a sound. Small. Not crying. Leo did not cry easily. She had learned this about him. More like movement. The specific restlessness of a child who could not be still and could not be seen being restless. Junwoo moved toward the door. Naomi said, "Wait." He stopped. She said, "Not like this. Not right now, when you are standing in this room feeling what you are feeling. You go in there right now and he will see it on your face and he will manage you. He will fold himself smaller and take care of your guilt and put his own thing away so he can handle yours. He does this. You know he does this." Junwoo's jaw tightened. She said, "Sit down." He sat. Not because she told him to. Because he knew she was right, and the knowledge of it was the most isolating thing he had felt in years. She sat across from him. She said, "I need to tell you what I think is happening in that room right now." He said, "Tell me." She said, "Leo is trying to reconcile two things that do not reconcile easily. The man who checks his hands on a subway platform and the man he just watched at the school. He is trying to fit them into the same picture, and it is not fitting. And the most dangerous thing that can happen right now is if the story he lands on is, 'My father is someone I need to be afraid of.'" She paused. "Not afraid for. Afraid of." Junwoo looked at his hands. She said, "The only way that does not happen is if you go in there and you are honest with him. Not strategically honest. Not managed honest. Actually honest, in the way a father is honest with his child about something hard." He said, "I don't know how to do that." She said, "I know you don't. That's not an insult. You have been building systems for so long that you have forgotten, or maybe never fully learned, how to be in a room with someone you love without the system running." He looked at her. She looked back. There was a long moment between them. Not comfortable, not romantic, not the soft thing that people imagine passed between two people beginning to matter to each other. It was harder than that. It was the look that passed between two people who were being completely honest with each other in a situation where honesty was the most costly possible option. He said, "You could lose your job over this." She said, "I know." He said, "You should not be here." She said, "I know that too." He said, "Why are you?" She thought about the granola bar in her pocket on a subway platform. She thought about a boy asking her what stop she was getting off at in the voice of a child who was not sure anyone would answer. She thought about sitting on the floor behind a couch and not making it a lesson. She thought about a photograph in a kitchen cabinet, opened every morning by a woman who was still looking. She said, "Because I am not going to leave a child in the middle of something this big with only one adult who loves him." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. The way he nodded when something was settled. He stood up. He went to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water he set on the table without explanation. He stood at the window and looked out at the city for a while. He was, she understood, doing what she had told him to do, sitting with himself, letting the charge come out of the moment before he went to his son. Naomi stayed. She had calls she should return. She had case files that were not going to complete themselves. She had a supervisor who had already left 2 messages she had not answered, and a professional situation that was deteriorating in real time, and a pattern she had identified in herself that she was walking straight into with her eyes open. She stayed anyway. 20 minutes later, Leo's door opened. He came out in his socks, which he always wore in the apartment, and he stood in the living room doorway and looked at both of them for a moment with a careful, measuring attention that was the most distinctly Leo thing about him. He said to Junwoo, "I need to talk to you." Junwoo said, "Okay." Leo looked at Naomi, not asking her to leave. Something else. Something that said, "I want you to hear this too. I am choosing to say this in front of you. That choice means something." He came and sat on the couch. Junwoo sat across from him. Naomi stayed where she was. Leo put his hands on his knees. He looked at his father steadily. And then he said something that was so direct and so clear and so entirely Leo that it arrived like a physical thing in the center of the room. He said, "I know what you do. I've always known. I heard things and I figured out the rest. I'm not stupid and I'm not little." Junwoo opened his mouth. Leo said, "Let me finish." Junwoo closed his mouth. "I told myself it was okay," Leo said. "I told myself it was okay because it was for me. Because you were keeping me safe and that was the most important thing and everything else was just," he searched for the word, "just the cost. I told myself that. He paused. I don't want to tell myself that anymore. The room was absolutely quiet. Leo looked at his father, and his face was doing the specific thing that faces did when they were both very young and very old simultaneously. The face of a child who has processed something that should have been an adult's burden and has brought it back as a gift instead of a grievance. He said, I don't want you to hurt people for me anymore. He said it without accusation, without anger, with the full, steady weight of someone who meant every word and had chosen to say it because he believed it would be heard. He said, I don't want you to be the scary thing. I want you to be my dad. Junwoo did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was different. Not smaller. Nothing about Junwoo Park was small, but stripped of its management. Just the voice itself, without the architecture around it. He said, I hear you. Leo looked at him for another moment. Then he nodded. He picked up the remote from the couch cushion. He turned on the television to a channel that was playing something about trains. Of course it was, and he settled back against the cushions like he had said the thing he needed to say, and the saying of it had released something. Junwoo sat across from him and did not move. Naomi looked at both of them. She thought, this is the real moment. Not the subway platform, not the surveillance photographs, not the empire or the network or the danger that was still very much present and unresolved. This, a boy and his father in a living room, a television on low, the specific enormous ordinary intimacy of a child saying you are not meeting the standard I believe you are capable of, and a father hearing it, this was the real moment. This was where everything either broke or began to be built. She thought it was beginning to be built. She also thought about what Junwoo had said before Leo came out of his room. You could lose your job over this. And she thought about the message she had been putting off opening from her supervisor. And she thought about Priya's voice. I would think hard about whether this was a situation I could be useful in, or whether it was a situation that would use me up. She picked up her phone. She opened the message. She read it. She sat for a moment with what it said. Then she put her phone face down on the couch beside her, because some things needed to wait their turn, and right now the most important thing in this room was a boy watching a train documentary in his socks and his father sitting across from him, finding out in real time what it felt like to be seen by someone who loved him enough to tell him the truth. But the message was from her supervisor. And what it said was going to take something from Naomi that no one in that room was going to be able to give back. If you think you know what is in that message, you might be right. And it is going to hurt. And it is going to force Naomi to make a choice that this entire story has been building toward since a phone hit the floor of a subway car and a voice said one word. The next chapter is where everyone pays the price of proximity. And the price, for Naomi Bennett, is going to be the thing she has used to make meaning out of every hard year of her adult life. Stay with us. Because you have come too far to look away now. And if this story is reaching something real in you, share it. Someone in your life needs to hear it. The message was 8 sentences long. Naomi read it twice on the couch in Junwoo's living room, with Leo's train documentary playing low in the background and Junwoo sitting across from his son in the particular silence of two people who had just said something true to each other and were still inside the weight of it. She read it the first time fast, the way you read something you were already partially expecting. She read it the second time slowly, the way you read something you needed to fully own. Her supervisor's name was Gerald Hatch. He was a careful man, Gerald. Precise. The kind of administrator who chose words the way a builder chose load-bearing walls, deliberately, with an understanding of what they were holding up. He did not use strong language loosely. He did not escalate without cause. The message said that a formal conflict of interest review had been opened against Naomi Bennett. It said that her name had been flagged in connection with an individual currently under informal law enforcement observation. It said that pending the outcome of the review, her case access and professional clearances were suspended. Effective immediately. It said she was to report to his office the following morning. It said, at the end, in a sentence that sat apart from the others with the specific weight of something a careful man had added last and meant most, Naomi, I don't know what you are involved in. I hope you know what you are doing. 8 sentences. She sat with them. The professional track in her mind, the one that had been running parallel to everything else for weeks, laid it out with a clean, merciless efficiency of a system that did not accommodate sentiment. Her clearances were her access. Her access was her ability to help children. Her ability to help children was the mechanism through which 11 years of absorbing the world's worst angles had been made survivable. It was not just her job. It was the framework through which she understood herself. The way her life made sense. They had taken it. Not Jun-woo. Not the network. Gerald Hatch had not written that message out of malice. But somewhere in the machinery, somewhere between the flagged database search and the informal law enforcement observation and the particular city official whose photograph Jun-woo had left face down on the table, something had moved. A name had appeared in a report somewhere. A connection had been noted. And the machinery had done what machinery did. She put her phone in her pocket. She looked at Leo on the couch, still watching the trains, feet tucked up beneath him now, face at ease in the relaxed, unguarded way it got when he had done something hard and come out the other side of it. She looked at Jun-woo, who had not moved from the chair across from his son, and who was watching Leo watch television with a particular quality of attention of someone who was memorizing something precious. She thought, I should tell him. She thought, not right now. She thought, Leo needs this hour. This specific ordinary hour of a boy watching television and a father sitting with him. She was not going to walk into this room with her professional crisis and displace what was happening here. That was not a cost she was willing to impose. She stood up quietly. She said, I'm going to head out. Leo looked over from the couch. He said, okay. Then, after a beat, will you come back? She said, yes. He nodded. That was sufficient for Leo. It was the directness of someone who had learned that the people who said yes and meant it were indistinguishable from the people who said yes and didn't, until they showed up or didn't. So you accepted the yes and you waited and you found out which kind it was. She would show up. He would find out. Jun-woo walked her to the door. In the hallway, he looked at her and she understood that he already knew something had shifted. He had been reading rooms his entire adult life. He could read her. She said, I'll tell you tomorrow. He said, tonight. She said, tomorrow, Jun-woo. A pause. He looked at her steadily. She looked back. It was the particular negotiation of two people who were each, in their own way, accustomed to being the most controlled person in any given situation, working out the geometry of how that functioned between them. He said, Are you safe? She said, yes. He accepted that. She left. She walked home in cold air, hands in her pockets, and she let herself feel what she had been holding at arm's length since she read the message. She let it arrive fully. The loss of it, the professional apparatus that had been the structure of her adult life, suspended now, pending a review that could go any direction, controlled by processes she could not fully access or influence. She had always known this was a possible cost. She had walked toward it clearly, eyes open, with the deliberate choice she had made at her kitchen table weeks ago when she asked herself, is this the pattern, or is this a decision? It was a decision. She had made it. That did not make the cost smaller. That just meant she had chosen it. She got home. She made tea this time and actually drank it. She sat at her kitchen table and looked at the two printed case files that had been living on it for 2 weeks and thought about what Priya had said. The last caseworker who filed a formal report connecting those markers was removed inside of 2 weeks. She had not filed a formal report. She had been more careful than that. But someone had been watching anyway. The city official. The man in the photograph. The piece of the network that lived inside the infrastructure, invisible and positioned, making sure certain names flagged in certain ways. They had moved on her. Not dramatically. Not with threat or confrontation. With paperwork. With the quiet institutional violence of a process that looked entirely legitimate from the outside. She thought, this is what Jun-woo meant when he said the law was too slow. She had spent 11 years believing in the system, believing that it was slow and flawed and frustrating but ultimately navigable, ultimately capable of doing what it was supposed to do if you pushed hard enough from inside it. She still believed that. But she understood now, sitting at her kitchen table at 11 p.m. with her clearances suspended and the 2 case files spread in front of her, that believing in the system and trusting it blindly were 2 different things. And that some of the people who had sworn to operate the system had decided a long time ago that it was a tool to be used rather than a structure to be honored. She thought about Jun-woo at a corporate audit, 34 years old, finding money moving through a company in a way that didn't make sense, going to the authorities, being told to drop it. She thought about him not dropping it. She thought about the 8 years between that moment and now, the empire built, the damage done, the hundreds of children removed from situations they should never have been in, and the cost of every single one of those removals paid in methods she could not condone. She thought, I understand now how he got there. She thought, understanding is not the same as accepting. She thought, and he is trying to change it. Whether that is real or not, whether he is capable of it or not. He told me he wants to do this correctly, and he is sitting in that apartment right now with his son watching trains on television and choosing the room instead of the operation. She thought, that is worth something. She went to bed. She did not sleep well. In the morning she called Priya before she went to Gerald Hatch's office. Priya answered immediately. Naomi said, they opened a review. A silence. Then, how bad? Naomi said, full clearance suspension pending outcome. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Naomi, the name they flagged you with, is it the name I think it is? Naomi said, yes. Another silence. Longer. Then Priya said, there is a way through this. It is not the way you want it to be, and it is not fast. But there is a way through. She paused. But it is going to require you to make a decision about what you are willing to do and what you are willing to give up in the doing of it. Naomi said, I know. Priya said, do you love him? Naomi was quiet. She thought about sitting on a floor behind a couch. She thought about a man who crouched down before he did anything else. She thought about the specific quality of watching two people, a father and a son, find their way toward honesty in a living room at the end of a terrible day. She said, I don't know yet, but I know what is right. And that is going to have to be enough. Priya said, that is usually how it starts. She went to Gerald Hatch's office. She sat across from him and she was, in the specific way that Naomi was things, completely honest. She did not give him Junwoo's name in any operational context. She did not give him anything that would move through the machinery to the city official to the network. But she gave Gerald enough of the shape of it, enough of the child in the middle of it, enough of what she had seen and what she knew, that he sat back in his chair and looked at his hands for a long time and then looked at her and said, what do you need from me? She told him. He was quiet. He said, that will not protect your clearances in the short term. She said, I know. He said, you understand what this costs. She said, I do. He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded, once, with the gravity of a careful man making a decision he was going to have to live with. She left his office. She walked out into the morning and called Marcus. She said, tell Junwoo I need to see him tonight. Not at the apartment. Marcus said, he wants to see you too. He says it is urgent. She said, what happened? Marcus said, not on the phone. She said, Marcus, what happened? A pause. Marcus said, Leo is safe. He is with us. But Ms. Bennett, there was an incident this morning at the Foundation office. Someone got in. Files were accessed. He paused again. And there is something else. Something that came through the intelligence channels this morning that changes everything we thought we knew about the timeline. Her hand tightened around the phone. She said, how much time do we have? Marcus was quiet for 3 seconds. 3 full seconds, which in the language of people like Marcus was an eternity. Then he said, not as much as we thought. She was already walking. Because the network had stopped mapping and stopped waiting and stopped running tests. They had moved to the next phase. And the next phase was not about patience or precision or a man standing across from a school watching a side exit. The next phase was the ending they had been planning all along. And if Naomi and Junwoo and a boy who memorized subway exits could not get to the right place before the right moment, the story was not going to end the way any of them needed it to. You have come 10 chapters into this story. You have watched Naomi choose it over and over. You have watched Junwoo begin to crack open the wall he built himself inside of. You have watched Leo tell his father the truest thing anyone had said out loud in that apartment in years. Do not stop now. Because the next chapter is where the woman in the photograph finally steps into the room. And when she does, when Leo looks at her face and she looks at his, something is going to happen that neither years of surveillance nor all of Junwoo's planning nor all of Naomi's professional training could have prepared any of them for. Something true. Something that cannot be undone. Something that was always coming. If this story has moved you, if it has landed somewhere real, like and share it right now. Someone in your life is waiting for a story about what it means to love a child, to choose a family, and to become worthy of the people who believe in you. There are moments in a child's life that do not announce themselves as turning points. They arrive quietly. They arrive in doorways, in the space between one breath and the next, in the specific stillness of a room where something true is about to be said for the first time. They do not come with music or warning or any of the external signals that adults have learned to associate with significance. They come the way Leo came to Junwoo's study that night. In his socks. Tablet under his arm. Standing in the doorway for a long moment before he said anything. Looking at his father the way he looked at a subway map he was trying to fully understand before he committed to a route. Junwoo was at his desk. Not working. The laptop was open but the screen had gone dark from inactivity. He was sitting the way he sat when he was thinking rather than doing. Still. Both hands flat on the desk. His face carrying the particular weight of a man who had spent the day being dismantled quietly, piece by piece, and was sitting in the debris of it trying to figure out what was worth rebuilding and what needed to be left on the floor. Leo looked at him for a moment. Then he came in and sat in the chair across from the desk. The chair was too large for him. It was a chair built for adult conversations, for people who arrived with agendas and left with decisions. Leo sat in it and pulled his knees up and rested his chin on them and looked at his father from that folded position with the absolute, undefended directness that was the most specifically Leo thing about him. He said, "I need to tell you something." Junwoo said, "Okay. I know what you do," Leo said. "I've always known. I'm not saying I know every detail. But I know the shape of it. I know what the men who come here are. I know what it means when you don't sleep and you don't tell me why. I know what it means when Marcus gets a phone call and you both leave the room." He paused. "I've known for a long time. I'm not stupid and I'm not little and I need you to stop treating me like I don't already live in this." Junwoo opened his mouth. Leo said, "Let me finish." Junwoo closed his mouth. This was the thing about Leo that had always been true and that Junwoo was only now, in this chair, in this room, at the end of this particular day, fully reckoning with. Leo had never been passive inside this story. He had never been simply carried by it. He had been watching and learning and constructing and processing from the very beginning, building his own understanding of the world he lived in with the same meticulous care he brought to his subway maps. He had been, all along, doing the work of understanding. And tonight, he had decided the understanding was complete enough to speak. "I told myself it was okay," Leo said. "Every time I heard something or figured something out, I told myself it was okay because it was for me. Because you were keeping me safe and that was what mattered and the other stuff was just the cost. I told myself that a lot." He looked at the desk between them. Then back up. "I don't want to tell myself that anymore." Junwoo said nothing. The room was very quiet. Through the window, the city made its low, unceasing sound. Somewhere in the building, an elevator moved. Leo said, "I saw what you did today." Junwoo's hands, flat on the desk, did not move. "I saw it," Leo said. "And I know why you did it. I know it was because of me. I know you were scared and you were angry and you were trying to protect me." He paused. "But Dad." He said the word the way he always said it, easily, completely, as though it was the most natural word in the language, which for Leo it was. "When I saw it, when I saw your face, I got scared too. And not scared of the other guy." The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. Junwoo looked at his son. Leo looked back at him. And something happened in that exchange that was beyond language and below strategy and entirely outside the architecture of control that Junwoo had spent his adult life building and maintaining and relying on as the primary mechanism of his survival. Something cracked. Not the wall. The wall had been cracking for weeks, since a subway platform, since a phone on the floor, since a woman sitting down beside a boy without being asked and a boy reaching up and taking a hand. The wall had been cracking for a while. What cracked now was the thing behind the wall. The thing Junwoo Park had been protecting with every system and plan and strategic deployment of controlled violence for 8 years. The thing that had been sitting in the center of all of it, unexamined and unspoken and defended from every angle, because looking at it directly had not been something he could afford and surviving without looking at it directly had been possible. Until tonight. Until this boy in this chair with his knees pulled up and his face open and his voice steady with the particular steadiness of someone who is not performing bravery but has simply decided that truth matters more than comfort. Junwoo said, "Leo." Leo said, "I'm not done." Junwoo waited. Leo said, "I don't want you to hurt people for me anymore. I don't want to be the reason. I don't want to wake up one day and find out that everything you did that was wrong, everything that hurt people, was done in my name. I don't want to be what made you that." He paused. "Because I know you're not that. I know you're better than that. I've always known you're better than that." And there it was. Not the accusation. Not the condemnation. Not the child turning away from the father in horror or disgust, or the righteous disappointment of someone discovering that their hero is human. The opposite. The claim. The fierce, clear, entirely Leo claim of a boy who looked at his father at the bottom of the worst day either of them had lived through in years and said, "I know who you are. The real one. Under all of this. And I am asking you to be that person. Because I believe you can. Because I have always believed you can." That was not a child's innocence talking. That was something harder and more valuable than innocence. That was faith that had been stress-tested, that had looked at something frightening and held on anyway, that had survived the subway and the surveillance photographs and the side exit of a school and the look on a father's face in 20 feet of terrible clarity, and was still here. Still claiming. Still holding. Junwoo looked at his son for a long moment. Then he said something he had not said in 8 years of dismantling networks and managing threats and building an empire on the foundation of the single worst thing the world had ever shown him. He said, "You're right." 2 words. Leo looked at him. Junwoo said, "You are right. I have been using what I do as though protecting you excused everything it cost. I told myself I had no choice. I told myself the law was too slow and the children could not wait, and those things were true. They were true and they are true. But I have been using them as a permanent permission, and they are not that." He paused. "And today I was not doing what I did for any principle. I was doing it because I was afraid. And fear is not a reason. It is just fear." Leo looked at him steadily. He said, "Are you going to stop?" Junwoo said, "Yes." Leo said, "How?" Junwoo said, "I don't fully know yet. But I am going to figure it out. And I am going to tell you how it goes." He paused. "I am not going to manage it away from you. Not anymore." Leo looked at him for one more long moment. Measuring. The way he measured everything. Not distrustfully, but completely. Taking the full weight of it before he decided how to hold it. Then he nodded. He unfolded himself from the chair. He came around the desk, and he stood beside his father, and he put one hand on Junwoo's arm the way he had put his hand in his on the subway platform. Easily, completely, as though the gesture cost nothing because it was already decided, already true, already as natural as breathing. He said, "Okay." Then he said, "I'm hungry." Junwoo looked at him. Leo said, "Can we make the noodles?" And Junwoo, who had dismantled trafficking networks and moved through shadows for 8 years and had never once in all of that time been undone by a single thing the world had done to him, stood up and went to the kitchen with his son and made noodles at 9:30 at night. And it was, Naomi would later think when she heard about it, the most important thing he had ever done. But the night was not finished. Because 2 hours later, after Leo was asleep and the kitchen was clean, Junwoo's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. 3 sentences. The kind of 3 sentences that changed the shape of everything that came after them. The network had moved its timeline forward. An operation was in preparation. And the intelligence had surfaced something that had not been in any prior report. A name, a contact, a specific individual who had been feeding Leo's location and schedule to the network's new leadership not for weeks. 4 months. Someone who was not a street-level operative. Someone who was not an outer contact or a mid-level coordinator or a man standing across from a school with a specific kind of patience. Someone who had been inside the circle from the very beginning. Junwoo looked at the message for a long time. Then he looked at the closed door of Leo's bedroom. And he thought, everything I have done to protect him. Every choice. Every cost. Every price paid by every person who got too close to this story. And somewhere inside his own circle, for months, a door had been left open. If you thought this story had reached its most dangerous moment, you were not wrong. But you were not finished either. Because what Junwoo is about to discover about the person who left that door open is going to shake the foundation of everything he thought he had built. And it is going to force a choice that no empire, no matter how carefully constructed, can make for you. Are you still with us? This is where the walls come all the way down. And it starts with a woman who has been waiting 7 years to walk through a door she was never supposed to be kept out of. Share this story. Someone needs it right now. The room Naomi had chosen was small and neutral. That was deliberate. She had spent 11 years learning that the physical environment of a difficult meeting was not incidental. It was active. It shaped what people were able to say and hear and receive. A room too formal created distance. A room too comfortable created a false sense of safety that collapsed the moment something real was said. What you wanted was neutral. Plain table. Chairs at equal height. A window that let in natural light without making the space feel exposed. A room that said, nothing here is decided yet. Everything here is still possible. She had borrowed it from a colleague, a family mediator named Sandra who worked 2 floors up from the office Naomi was currently suspended from, who had listened to a 6-sentence explanation and handed over her keys without asking for details. That was the thing about people who did real work. They recognized it in each other. Junwoo arrived first. He came 15 minutes early, which did not surprise her, and he walked the room twice when he entered. Not dramatically, just the assessment of someone whose habits ran deep, and then he stood at the window with his hands in his pockets and looked at the street below. He said, "How is this going to go?" She said, "Honestly, I don't know. But I need you to make me a promise." He turned from the window. She said, "Whatever she says today. Whatever she feels. Whatever Leo eventually decides he needs. You are going to remain the safest person in this room. You are not going to manage it. You are not going to control the outcome. You are going to sit in that chair and you are going to be present for whatever happens." He looked at her. She said, "Can you do that?" A pause that was longer than she would have liked and shorter than she had feared. He said, "Yes." The children's counselor arrived next. Her name was Dr. Angela Moore, 50s, calm, the specific quality of stillness that came from years of sitting with people in the most unguarded moments of their lives. Naomi had worked with her before. She trusted her completely. Then soon She came through the door the way she moved through the surveillance footage. Small, contained, wearing a jacket that was slightly too large and carrying nothing except a folded piece of paper in her right hand that she held the way you held something you were not going to let go of. She looked at Naomi first. Then at Dr. Moore. Then at Junwoo. The look that passed between Park Junwoo and Park Soon-hee lasted 4 seconds. Naomi watched it. It was not the look of enemies. It was not the look of strangers. It was the look of 2 people who shared the context of the worst thing either of them had ever survived and had been orbiting that shared context from opposite sides for 7 years and were now, for the first time, in the same room with it. Soon-hee sat down. She did not perform composure. She was not composed. Her hands on the table were not still. They moved slightly, a small ongoing tremor that she did not try to hide and that Naomi noted and held carefully. She was present in the way that people were present when they had been managing something enormous for a very long time and had finally arrived at the place where management was no longer possible and presence was all that was left. Naomi said, "Thank you for coming, Soon-hee. I know this required a great deal of trust." Soon-hee looked at her. Her English was careful, precise, each word placed with the attention of someone for whom it was a second language that they had made reliable through years of use. She said, "I did not come because I trust. I came because there is no more time to not come." Direct. True. Naomi respected it immediately. Dr. Moore said, Soon-hee, there are no legal proceedings happening in this room today. Nothing said here will be used in any court or official process. This is a human meeting between people who all care about the same child. Soon-hee looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. She said, I did not leave him. She said it to the room, to all of them. But her eyes went to Jun-woo. I did not leave him, she said again. I have needed someone to hear that. I have needed someone who knows him to hear that for 7 years. I did not leave him. He was taken from me. And I have been. Her voice shifted, not breaking, something harder than breaking, something that held itself together through sheer force of the need to be understood. I have been looking for him since the day I was able to look. Silence. Jun-woo said, I know. She looked at him. He said, I know you did not leave him. I knew that from the beginning. He paused. I should have found you sooner. I did not. That was wrong, and I cannot give those years back. The statement landed in the room with the specific weight of a real admission. Not managed, not strategic, not the version you constructed to appear honest while protecting your position. The kind that cost something. Naomi watched Soon-hee receive it. Watched the slight shift in her posture. Not softening, more like something that had been braced against impact, absorbing the fact that the impact it expected had not come. Soon-hee said, Where is he? Naomi said, He is safe. He is with people we trust. She said, Does he? She stopped. Started again. Does he know I exist? A pause. Jun-woo said, He knows now. We told him recently. He paused, and something moved through his face. He said he already knew. He said you were in his dreams. Soon-hee closed her eyes. 1 moment. 2. Then she opened them. She put both hands flat on the table. She looked at Jun-woo directly and she said, I am not here to take him. I want you to hear that clearly. I am not here with a legal claim or a demand or an intention to disrupt his life. She paused. He has a life. He has a father. I can see what you have built for him, and I am not. Another pause. I am not going to pretend I do not have feelings about 7 years. But he is not a possession, and this is not a negotiation. She opened her hand. The folded piece of paper she had been holding. She unfolded it on the table. It was the photograph. The baby. Round-faced, dark-eyed. Caught in a moment of complete concentrated attention directed at something off-camera. She said, I only want him to know that I did not leave. I want him to know that I looked. I want him to know. And here the voice shifted again, and this time it did not hold entirely, and she did not try to make it hold. I want him to know that there was never a single day that I stopped. The room was very quiet. Dr. Moore said gently, Would you like to meet him? Soon he looked at the photograph on the table. She said, Yes. If he wants. Only if he wants. Naomi looked at Jun-woo. He was looking at the photograph of the baby. His son at 18 months. The same boy who was now 10 years old and made noodles and built subway maps and had sat in a study chair the night before and told his father the truest thing anyone had said in that apartment in years. He said, I will ask him. He said it simply. Without calculation. Without the empire or the surveillance or the architecture of control that had characterized every other significant decision of the past 8 years. He said it the way a father said things, with the specific vulnerability of someone whose heart was in another room and whose role was to carry information between that room and the world outside it, regardless of what it cost him. He said, I will ask him what he wants. And whatever he says, I will support it. Naomi watched him say it. She thought, this is the one. This is the moment. Not the subway platform. Not the study. Not the noodles at 9:30 at night. This is where Jun-woo Park becomes something different from what he has been. Right here, in a borrowed mediation room, saying I will ask him what he wants, and meaning it. Dr. Moore said, Soon-hee, is there anything else you need to say before we close today? Soon-hee looked at the photograph for a moment. Then she folded it carefully. Put it back in her pocket. She looked at Jun-woo one more time. She said, Take care of him. He said, I will, she said. I know. A pause. I could see it. Even from a distance. I could see it. She stood. She smoothed her jacket. She thanked Dr. Moore and nodded at Naomi. And then she walked to the door with the small, careful movement of someone who had been carrying something enormous for 7 years and had just set down a portion of it. Not all of it, not the whole weight, but enough to change the way she stood. She left. The room held its silence. Then Junwoo said, quietly, to Naomi, "What if he wants to go with her?" Naomi had been waiting for this question since the surveillance footage. Since the photograph in the kitchen cabinet. Since the night Leo had stood in the study doorway and said, "She is in my dream." She said, "Then you support that. Because fatherhood is not ownership. It never was." He looked at her. She said, "You did not become his father by keeping him from the rest of his story. You became his father by showing up every day for 10 years and choosing him and being chosen back. That doesn't disappear because she exists. They are both true. They have always both been true." He was quiet. She said, "You already know this." He said, "I know it. I needed to hear myself not argue with it." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "You just told a woman you kept from her child for 7 years that you were wrong. And you said it without conditions or qualifications or a single word of self-defense." He said nothing. She said, "That is not the man who showed up on that subway platform 8 weeks ago." He looked at her. She said, "That is better than that man." The moment between them was not soft. It was not the warm, easy moment of two people who had arrived somewhere comfortable. It was harder than that. The moment between two people who had paid for where they were standing, who had given up things that mattered to get here, who were not comfortable but were present, and who understood that present was the only currency that actually built anything real. He said, "Your clearances." She said, "I'm working on it." He said, "Because of me." She said, "Because of a choice I made." He said, "Naomi." She said, "Don't apologize. Not for this. I made the choice. I would make it again." She picked up her coat. "What I need from you right now is not an apology. It is the follow-through on what you said in this room today." He said, "You'll have it." She said, "I know I will." She walked to the door. She turned back once. She said, "Ask him soon." About soon he. Don't let him wait. He said, "Tonight." She nodded. She left. She walked out onto the street and stood for a moment in the cold air and thought about a woman carrying a photograph in her pocket every day for 7 years and finally setting it on a table in a room where it could be seen. She thought about what that cost. She thought about the specific kind of courage that did not make noise, that moved quietly through the world, through laundromats and unofficial channels and early mornings at a window, sustaining itself on nothing except the refusal to accept that love, once given, was simply lost. She thought, Soon-hee did not rescue Leo. Junwoo did not rescue Leo. Nobody in this story is the hero of someone else's redemption. They are all just people, doing the best version of what they have available, in a world that did not give any of them an easy starting point. She thought, that is the truest thing about all of it. And she thought about what was still unresolved. The network. The timeline that had accelerated. The insider that Junwoo's intelligence had surfaced. The name that had arrived in those 3 sentences to Marcus the night before, the name that Naomi had been told this morning but had not yet fully processed because processing it meant accepting something about the structure of everything they thought they had built. The inside contact was not a peripheral figure. The inside contact was someone who had been present at meetings, who had heard plans, who had known, with specificity and detail, every significant decision Junwoo had made in the past several months about Leo's security. Which meant everything they had planned was already known. Which meant the next move needed to be something no one had told this person. Which meant it needed to be something no one had planned yet. She walked faster. Because what was coming in the next chapter was not a meeting in a neutral room. What was coming was the moment where the empire came down. Not in a blaze, not in the dramatic collapse of something built on violence, but in the slow, costly, necessary work of a man choosing to dismantle what he had built and replace it with something that could survive in daylight. And it was going to cost him the thing he valued most after Leo. We are almost at the end of this story. And the end is going to earn everything this story has asked of you. Hit the like button now. Because someone you know is carrying something they have been carrying alone for too long. And this story is for them. The thing about dismantling an empire is that it is never clean. People imagine it as a single decisive moment, a king standing at the throne and saying it is over, laying down the crown, walking out into the open air a different man. They imagine the before and the after and a clean line between them and a clear sense of what was gained and what was left behind. It is not like that. It is slow and it is costly and it destroys things you did not expect it to destroy, and some of what it destroys is not the empire but the people who helped you build it. And some of those people are not wrong to feel what they feel when the thing they gave years of their lives to is taken apart from the inside by the man who asked them to build it. Junwoo understood this. He had understood it intellectually for weeks, since the study, since Leo's voice saying, "I don't want you to hurt people for me anymore," since the mediation room and soon, he putting a photograph on a table and the specific quality of honesty that had moved through that room like weather. He had understood it intellectually and he had been preparing for it operationally. He had not been prepared for Raymond. Raymond Cole was 51 years old. He had been with Junwoo for 6 years. Longer than any other member of the core team, longer than Marcus, longer than anyone except the operation itself. He had lost a daughter, 7 years old, to a network in another city that had since been dismantled through methods that were, by any legal standard, entirely inadmissible but were, by every human standard that Raymond operated on, completely justified. Raymond had not come to Junwoo looking for work. He had come looking for the thing that work sometimes became when the work was the right kind: purpose, structure, the organized, strategic application of grief toward something that could be called an outcome. He had found it. He had been, in every meaningful operational sense, the most reliable person in Junwoo's circle. The one who did not need managing, did not need convincing, did not need to be pulled back from excess or redirected from distraction. The one who showed up completely and left nothing on the table and asked for nothing in return except the continued existence of the thing they were doing together. And the thing they were doing together was ending. Junwoo told him on a Wednesday morning in the building's back office, which they used for meetings that needed to stay off any official record. He told him the full shape of it, the evidence packages, the law enforcement contacts he had spent years vetting, the formal cooperation he was committing to, the financial penalties he was accepting, the parts of the operation that were going to surface in ways that would not be comfortable for anyone involved. He told him, "It is over. The violent part of it. The off-book part of it." He was not abandoning the mission, the protection of children, the disruption of networks, the work that had been real and necessary and had saved hundreds of lives. He was changing the method. He was bringing it into the light. He was building something that could exist in daylight and be defended in daylight and be passed on to other people who could carry it without requiring the specific, costly, isolating set of skills and permissions that Junwoo had assembled in himself over 8 years. He was choosing the version that Leo could know about and not be afraid of. Raymond listened to all of it. He sat across from Junwoo in the back office with his hands folded on the table and his face doing the thing it did when he was processing something significant, going very still, very inward, the specific stillness of a man who was running something through the system of his deepest values and waiting for the verdict. When Junwoo finished, Raymond said, "And the network. The current threat to Leo." Junwoo said, "We are handling it through the vetted channels. Evidence packages are already compiled. The city official, the contact inside the infrastructure, will be part of the formal submission. It will be handled correctly." Raymond said, "Correctly?" Junwoo said, "Yes." Raymond looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Junwoo, correctly means a process. Correctly means time. Correctly means the people who are currently planning to harm your son get to keep planning while the process works." He paused. "I have done this work for 6 years because it was not correct. Because correct was what failed the children in the first place." Junwoo said, "I know." Raymond said, "Then how?" He stopped. Restarted. "How do you look at what we have done and decide that the right thing now is to hand it to the system that failed before and trust that this time will be different?" Junwoo said, "I don't trust the system entirely. I trust the specific people inside it that I have spent years identifying. And I trust that Leo is 10 years old and he needs to be able to look at his father without being afraid of him. And I am not able to be the thing he needs me to be and the thing the operation has required me to be at the same time. Raymond sat with that. He said, "She changed you. Not an accusation. An observation. Flat and precise." Junwoo said, "Leo changed me. She helped me see it." Raymond looked at the table. A long silence. Then he said, "I can't do what you're asking." Junwoo said, "I know. I can't stand next to the system that—" He stopped. "My daughter. The people who took my daughter. They were handled correctly. There was a process. There was a trial. They received sentences that were, by any legal standard, appropriate." His voice did not break. It was too controlled to break. But something moved through it that was beyond breaking, something that had been managed and compressed for so long that it had become structural. "I cannot tell you that what we did was wrong. I cannot do that. I will not do that." Junwoo said, "I am not asking you to." Raymond looked up. Junwoo said, "I am not asking you to say it was wrong. I am asking you to accept that I have to do something different now. Not because it was wrong. Because I have a son who is watching. And because what he sees his father do is what he will believe is possible for him." Raymond was very still. Junwoo said, "Raymond, you lost your daughter. You chose to make that loss mean something by protecting other people's children. You did that. It was real and it mattered and it will always have mattered. But I need you to hear me. The method is not the mission. The method was always a vehicle. The mission was always the children." Raymond looked at the table for a very long time. Then he said, "I won't work against you." Junwoo said, "I know. But I can't. I'm not built to do it the way you're describing. I'm not built for that anymore." Junwoo nodded. He said, "Then this is where we separate. With respect. With the full acknowledgement of what you gave and what it cost you." He paused. "You are not the inside contact, Raymond. I want you to know that I know that." Raymond looked up sharply. Junwoo said, "The name we identified was Derek Ferris." He watched Raymond's face. "He was in position before you. He was placed before either of us understood what was being built inside." Raymond's expression shifted. Something moving through it that was not surprise but was something adjacent to relief. The relief of a man who had been afraid of a question and was being told the question was not about him. He said, "Ferris." Junwoo said, "Yes." Raymond sat back. He processed this for a moment. Then he said, "What are you going to do about him?" Junwoo said, "The right way." Raymond looked at him. He said, "That better be enough." Junwoo said, "It will be." Raymond stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He stood for a moment without putting it on, just holding it, the way you held something when you were not ready to leave but understood that staying was no longer the right thing. He said, "The children we got to. The ones who came through. Remember them." Junwoo said, "Every day." Raymond put on his jacket. He left. Junwoo sat in the back office alone for a while. He sat with the specific cost of what had just happened. The loss of the man who had been the most reliable presence in 6 years of the most demanding work of his life. Not just professionally. The loss of someone who understood, from the inside, what it had been and what it had required and what it had taken, without needing it explained. There were not many people in Junwoo's life who had that quality. There were fewer now. He sat with it. Then he picked up his phone and called Naomi. She answered on the second ring. He said, "The evidence packages are ready. The submission to the vetted contacts is ready. And Derek Ferris has been identified and the documentation connecting him to the network is included." He paused. "We can move tomorrow." She said, "Raymond." He said, "He's out. He won't work against us." She said, "Are you okay?" He was quiet. She said, "Junwoo." He said, "I am okay. I will be okay." He paused. "How is Leo?" She said, "He asked me this morning whether he was going to meet her soon." He said, I told him tonight. She said, how did he take it? He said, he asked 2 questions. He asked if she was nice. And he asked if she was safe. She said, what did you tell him? He said, I told him she was both. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, and the investigation. When it opens, there will be exposure. Your name in newspapers. Formal proceedings. He said, yes. She said, you're ready for that. He said, I have been ready for that since the study. Since Leo told me he did not want to carry the cost anymore. A pause. It is not an easy thing to accept that the most important decision you make in this process might also be the most publicly uncomfortable one. But Leo is watching. And what Leo sees his father do when it is difficult and costly and uncomfortable is the only lesson that actually matters. She was quiet. He said, Naomi. She said, yes. He said, stand beside me. While it is uncertain, I am not asking you to stay because I need the support. I have managed alone for a long time. I am asking you because you deserve to be asked properly. A pause. You have been beside this since the beginning without being asked, and I need you to know that I see that and I am asking now. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might be constructing the professional answer. The careful, appropriate, boundaried answer that protected her from the pattern she had identified in herself. Then she said, I'm already here. He said, I know. I needed to say it anyway. She said, I know you did. The next morning, Junwoo walked into the office of a federal investigator named Catherine Walsh, who had been the most carefully vetted name on a list he had been building for 3 years. He was carrying a document package that was 460 pages long. It contained financial records, surveillance documentation, operational logs, location records, and a complete profile of Derek Ferris's position inside the city infrastructure and his connection to the network's new leadership. He also handed her a separate folder. She opened it. She looked at what was inside. She looked at him. She said, this is your own operation. He said, yes. She said, you understand what this means. He said, yes. She said, you are willing to cooperate fully. He said, completely. With the understanding that the primary objective is the network and the protection of the children currently at risk. Everything else is secondary, including whatever happens to me. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, sit down. He sat. And the thing he had spent 8 years building began, finally, to become something that could exist in the open air. It was not painless. It was not fast. And it was not, in the weeks that followed, anything close to comfortable. His name appeared in newspapers. Not as a hero, not as a villain either, but in the complicated language of someone who had done real things for real reasons in ways that the law had not sanctioned and was now cooperating with the process of accounting for that. There were financial penalties. There were mandatory disclosures. There were conversations with lawyers that lasted for hours and conversations with Leo that lasted for minutes but cost infinitely more. Leo listened to everything Junwoo told him. He asked questions that were specific and direct, and occasionally so precisely aimed at the thing Junwoo found hardest to say that it was almost architectural. A child who had spent years mapping gaps finding, with no apparent effort, the exact location of every one in his father's explanation. And then, when Junwoo finished, Leo said, are you going to jail? Junwoo said, I don't know yet. I don't think so. But I don't know. Leo said, okay. Junwoo said, okay. Leo said, you did what you did and now you're doing this. That's how it works. You do the thing and then you deal with the thing. He paused. Naomi told me that. Junwoo looked at him. He said, she was right. Leo said, she usually is. A beat. Don't tell her I said that. She'll get a big head. And in the middle of the most professionally and legally exposed period of his life, Park Junwoo laughed. A real one. The kind that arrived without warning and cost nothing. Leo looked satisfied. But the investigation was not the only thing moving. Because in the 3 weeks following the submission to Catherine Walsh, Two things happened that confirmed something Naomi had believed since the evidence packages were first assembled. The first was that Derek Ferris was quietly placed on administrative leave pending an investigation that would eventually result in his removal from his position and his indictment on charges that connected him to 3 separate cases of evidence tampering in child welfare proceedings. The second was that the network's operation against Leo, the carefully planned, precisely mapped, extensively prepared operation that had been months in the making, collapsed. Not dramatically. Not in the explosive cinematic way that made for satisfying news reports. It collapsed the way things collapsed when the infrastructure beneath them was removed. Quietly, from the inside out, as key contacts were arrested and key funding channels were frozen and key communications were intercepted by people who had been given, by a cooperating witness who had spent 8 years learning exactly where everything was, the precise location of every load-bearing wall. Leo was safe. Not because a man had stood between him and danger with violence and controlled force. Because a man had chosen to dismantle the thing that had made him dangerous and replace it with something that worked. That was harder. That cost more. That was the only kind of protection that held. But in the apartment on the Upper West Side, on the night the network's operation was confirmed collapsed, something happened that nobody had planned for. Something that arrived the way the most important things arrived, without announcement, without ceremony, in the ordinary flow of an ordinary evening. Leo came out of his room. He was carrying his train book. The original one. The first one. The one he had owned since he was 7 years old and that had traveled with him through every move, every change, every version of his life up to and including this one. He said, "I want to give this to her." Junwoo said, "To Suni." Leo said, "Yeah." He looked at the cover of the book. "She kept my picture for 7 years. I want to give her something back." Junwoo looked at his son. He said, "That is a good idea." Leo said, "I know." He sat down on the couch with the book in his lap. "Will you come with me when I give it to her?" Junwoo said, "Yes." Leo said, "And Naomi?" Junwoo said, "I'll ask her." Leo said, "She'll say yes." He was right. And what happened in that meeting? What passed between a boy and a woman who had been looking for each other from opposite sides of a grief neither of them had chosen, was something that none of the adults in the room would fully be able to describe afterward. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was the opposite of dramatic. Because it was the kind of truth that did not require amplification. But that story is still on its way. Because what happens when Leo finally sits across from the woman in the photograph, and what he chooses, and what it costs, and what it builds, is where every single thread of this story finally arrives at the same place. Hope you are still here with us? We are almost home. Leo had been thinking about what to say for 3 days. Naomi knew this because he had mentioned it twice, once indirectly, asking her what you said to someone when you did not have the right words, and once directly, sitting at the kitchen table on a Thursday afternoon with his train book in front of him and his pencil turning slowly between his fingers, looking at her with the particular focused expression of someone running internal calculations on something they could not quite resolve. She had told him both times the same thing. She said, "You don't have to have the right words. You just have to show up." He had considered this. Both times. And both times he had nodded in the way he nodded when something was being filed for later use rather than immediately deployed. The meeting was on a Saturday morning. Dr. Angela Moore was there again, in the same borrowed room, now slightly more familiar. The table was the same, the window was the same, the chairs at equal height. It was early enough that the building was quiet. The city outside was doing its Saturday morning thing. Slower, lighter, the particular quality of weekend light that made even the ordinary geometry of streets and windows look slightly more forgiving. Leo arrived in his subway sweatshirt. Junwoo had asked, the night before, whether he wanted to wear something different. Leo had looked at him with the expression he deployed when a question was so unnecessary it barely warranted a response. He wore the sweatshirt. Naomi sat beside him. Not between him and anything, just beside, the way she had sat beside him on the subway, the way she had sat on the floor behind the couch. Present without occupying space. Available without imposing. Soon he came in. She was wearing a different jacket today. One that fit. Naomi noticed this. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. She had bought a jacket that fit for the day she met her son. Naomi thought about that choice. The quiet, private way that people prepared themselves for the moments that mattered, the rituals of readiness that nobody saw. Soon he sat down across from Leo. She looked at him. He looked at her. The room was completely still. Naomi had been in a lot of rooms with a lot of people experiencing a lot of significant moments. She had been trained to hold those rooms with professional steadiness, to be the regulated presence that allowed others to be unregulated, to keep her own reaction contained and her attention fully outward. She had done this for 11 years. She almost could not do it in this room. Because what was happening between Leo and Soon-hee was not the dramatic, tearful reunion that stories assembled from these ingredients typically generated. It was quieter than that. More specific. More real. It was two people, one 10 years old, one 29, recognizing each other across a distance that had been built not by choice but by the machinery of the world's worst tendencies, and finding that the recognition was not abstract. It was physical. It was in the shape of the face and the line of the jaw and the specific way he held her hands on the table that was so precisely the way Leo held his hands on every table that Naomi had to look at the window for a moment. Leo said, "Hi." Soon-hee said, "Hi." A pause. Leo said, "I know about you. My dad told me." She said, "I know about you too. I have been." She stopped. "I have been looking for you for a long time." Leo looked at her steadily. He said, "I know. I dreamed about you." She said, "What did you dream?" He said, "You were looking for me. You kept saying you were coming." He paused. "I didn't know what it meant for a long time. I thought maybe it was just a brain thing. Like how you dream stuff that doesn't mean anything." She was very still. He said, "But then I saw your picture. And I knew it meant you." The sentence was so direct and so simple and so entirely without performance that it arrived in the room like something physical. Naomi felt it. Dr. Moore felt it. Junwoo, standing slightly back from the table with his arms at his sides and his face doing the careful work of remaining open, felt it. Soon he said, "I want you to know." Her voice was precise and deliberate, each word placed with the care of someone who had been rehearsing this for 7 years and was now discovering that rehearsal was both preparation and inadequate. "I want you to know that I did not choose to leave you. I did not know you were taken. I was." She stopped. She looked at Dr. Moore briefly. Then back at Leo. "Something happened to me that I did not choose. And when I was able to look for you, I looked. I never stopped." Leo looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I know." She blinked. He said, "I know you didn't leave. I don't think you left." He paused, turning his pencil between his fingers the way he did when he was assembling something. "I don't know all of it yet. Dad said he would tell me more when I'm older. But I know enough." He looked at the table. Then back up. "I'm not mad at you." Soon-hee's hands, flat on the table, pressed down slightly. The small movement of someone absorbing something that has landed with more force than anticipated. She said, You don't have to feel any particular way." He said, "I know. I feel how I feel." A pause. "I'm still figuring it out. But I'm not mad." Dr. Moore said, gently, "Leo, is there anything you want to ask Soon-hee today?" Leo thought about this seriously. He turned the pencil. He looked at the table. He looked at the window. He looked back at Soon-hee. He said, "Did you look for me every day?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Even when it was hard?" She said, "Especially when it was hard." He nodded slowly. He picked up the train book from his lap. He had been holding it there since he sat down, his hand over the cover in the specific way he held things he was protecting. He placed it on the table and pushed it across toward her. She looked at it. He said, "I want you to have this. It's my first one. I've had it since I was 7. He paused. "I know it's just a book about trains. But it's the thing I care about most." So, a slight pause, a small swallow, the only sign that this was costing him something he did not want to show. "So it made sense to give it to you." Soon he looked at the book on the table. She put both hands around it. Not picking it up, surrounding it. The way you held something that had arrived in a form you had not anticipated and that you were not ready to fully receive but could not put down either. She said, "Thank you." He said, "You can keep it. Or give it back. Whatever you want." She said, "I would like to keep it." He said, "Okay." A small silence. The kind of silence that was not empty but full. Full of the weight of everything that had just been said and given and received, and the full, specific, irreversible reality of two people who were now connected in a way that could not be undone. Leo said, "Can I ask you something else?" She said, "Anything." He said, "Do you like trains?" Soon he looked at him. Something moved through her face. Not a smile exactly, the precursor to a smile, the specific facial preparation of someone who was surprised by joy in the middle of something that had been primarily grief. She said, "I don't know much about them." Leo said, "I can teach you." She said, "I would like that." He said, "Okay. We'll start with the subway system because that's the most important. There are 27 routes and most people only know like 5 of them, which is a waste." And the precursor became a smile. Naomi looked at Junwoo. He was looking at Leo. His face was not controlled. For the first time in all the weeks she had known him, through surveillance rooms and mediation tables and study doorways and borrowed meeting rooms and long nights with evidence packages and longer nights with his own choices laid out in front of him, his face was not controlled. It was open. Fully, completely, expensively open. The face of a man who had spent 8 years building walls and had just watched his son demonstrate, with a train book and a question about subway routes, that the walls had never been the point. The love had always been the point. The love was still there. After the meeting, they stood outside on the sidewalk, the 4 of them, which was a new configuration and felt new, slightly awkward and slightly necessary and slightly like the beginning of something that did not have a name yet. Leo stood between Naomi and Junwoo. Soon he stood across from them with the train book under her arm. Leo looked at all 3 of them. He said, "This is weird." Naomi said, "Yeah." He said, "But it's okay weird." Nobody argued with that. Soon he said she needed to get to work. She looked at Leo before she turned to go. She said, "Same time next week." He said, "I'll bring the next book. We'll do the express lines." She said, "I'll be ready." She walked away down the sidewalk. They watched her go. She was wearing the jacket that fit. She was carrying the train book under her arm like something precious. She turned the corner and was gone. Leo looked up at Junwoo. He said, "Dad." Junwoo said, "Yeah." Leo said, "I want to stay with you. Not because she's bad. She's not bad. But you're my dad and I already know how to love you." He paused. "I don't want to unchoose you." Junwoo looked at his son. He said, "You don't have to choose. She is not a replacement and I am not a replacement. You are allowed to have both." Leo considered this. He said, "Both." Junwoo said, "Both." Leo said, "Okay." He adjusted his backpack straps. "Can we get food? I want the noodles." They got the noodles. All 3 of them, Leo, Junwoo, and Naomi, at a corner table in a restaurant 2 blocks from the apartment, with Leo explaining the relative merits of the A train versus the C train with the focused passion of someone who had been waiting his whole life for a large enough audience. Naomi looked at the 2 of them across the table. She thought, this right here. This ordinary Saturday afternoon with noodles and train discourse, and a boy who had survived something unsurvivable and had come out the other side not bitter but curious, not closed but open, not smaller but somehow larger than the weight of everything he had carried. She thought, "I would give up my clearances 100 times for this." She thought, and that is how I know it was not the pattern. The pattern would have left her empty. This left her full. But something was still unresolved, not dangerously, not urgently, but with a specific quality of an open thread that needed to be tied before the story was complete. And it was going to come, as the most important things came, unexpectedly. Not today. Not this Saturday with noodles and train talk, and a boy who had chosen his father, and included his mother, and made room for a woman who had stayed when she should have left. But soon. And when it came, It was going to happen on a subway platform. Because of course it was. Come back for the final chapter. Because everything the story has built, every chapter, every cost, every choice, every person who showed up when they could have turned away, is going to arrive in the last place it started. And what gets said there is going to stay with you. This is a promise. 2 years. That is how much time passed between the night a phone hit the floor of a subway car and the morning that Naomi Bennett walked back into her office with her clearances fully reinstated, her name cleared of the conflict of interest finding, and a letter from Gerald Hatch on her desk that said, in the careful, load-bearing language of a precise man, "It is good to have you back where you belong." She read the letter once. She folded it. She put it in the top drawer of her desk and went to work. 2 years. A lot had happened inside them. The investigation that Jun-woo had walked into Catherine Walsh's office to initiate had moved through its process with a particular combination of slowness and eventual decisiveness that characterized federal proceedings when the evidence was airtight and the cooperating witness was thorough. Derek Ferris had been indicted on 7 counts, including evidence tampering, obstruction, and conspiracy to commit fraud in connection with child welfare proceedings. He was currently awaiting trial. His name had appeared in newspapers in a way that was not comfortable for anyone associated with him, which was, in Naomi's professional assessment, exactly correct. The network's new leadership structure had been substantially dismantled. Not completely. These things were never completely dismantled in a single action, and anyone who told you otherwise was selling a simplicity that reality did not support. But key figures were facing charges in 3 states. Key funding channels had been frozen. Key operational infrastructure had been disrupted in ways that would take years to rebuild, if it was rebuilt at all. The children who had been identified as currently at risk through the intelligence Jun-woo had provided were safe. Placed through official channels, with proper documentation, with actual caseworkers and actual legal protections and the slow, frustrating, imperfect but real machinery of a system that was supposed to protect them. Jun-woo had not gone to prison. He had come close. There had been a period of 4 months when the outcome was genuinely uncertain, and Naomi had stood beside him through every week of it without knowing how it would end and without deciding that the uncertainty changed what she had chosen. The financial penalties had been significant. The mandatory cooperation requirements had been extensive. His name was in the public record in ways that were not uncomplicated and that he had accepted without seeking to minimize or manage. He had accepted them the way you accepted the cost of a decision you would make again. The Park Foundation for Child Protection was now 18 months old. It operated legally, transparently, with a board of directors, an annual report, a partnership with 3 federal agencies, and a model for trauma-informed intervention and network disruption that was drawing attention from organizations in 11 countries. It was, by any measurable standard, more effective than what it had replaced. It reached more children. It operated with more institutional support. It was buildable. It could outlast the man who started it, could be taught, could be replicated, could become a standard. Jun-woo sat on the board and led the strategic direction and did not do the other things. He had not done the other things for 2 years. This was not easy, and he did not pretend it was easy, and he did not perform transformation for anyone's benefit. He sat with the discipline of it on the days it was hard, and he called Naomi on the evenings he needed to say out loud that it was hard, and she listened without fixing it because she had learned, finally and completely, the difference between the two. She had not moved in with him. They had not rushed what was between them into a shape it was not yet ready to take. They had done something harder and more honest. They had moved slowly, with full awareness of their own histories and their own patterns and the specific way each of them was liable to confuse intensity with love or avoidance with protection. They had moved slowly and paid attention and said true things at inconvenient moments and had not let the gravity of what surrounded them substitute for the actual, ordinary work of learning each other. It was the best relationship either of them had ever been in. Not because it was easy, because it was real. Leo was 12 now. He was taller than he had been, not dramatically, but measurably, in the way of children whose bodies were beginning to make decisions independently. He had lost some of the watchfulness. Not all of it. She did not expect all of it to go, and she had stopped framing its absence as the measure of his health. He was a child who would always know where the exits were. That was not damage. That was Leo. That was the specific, particular intelligence of a person who had learned early that the world had gaps and had turned the knowledge of that into a methodology for moving through it safely. He had started learning Korean 6 months ago. Not at Junwoo's suggestion, at his own. He had come home one day with a language learning app on his tablet and told Junwoo that he wanted to understand what was being said when the two of them talked and he was in the next room. Junwoo had looked at him for a moment and then said, "Fair enough." He had found a tutor the following week. Leo met with Soon-hee every other Saturday. He had given her 3 more train books. She had learned the A, C, and E lines, the specific exit strategies for 12 major stations, and the reason, as Leo had explained in considerable detail, that the L train was a structural problem that the city had been refusing to properly address for 20 years. She listened to all of it with the complete, undivided attention of someone who understood that this was not a lesson about trains. She had never once made him feel that the subject was not worth her full regard. She did not call him her son. He did not call her his mother. They did not have a word for what they were to each other yet, and neither of them seemed to be in a hurry to find one. What they had was specific and real and growing in the unhurried way that things grew when they were given the right conditions and not forced. Leo seemed, on balance, happy. Not the performed happiness of a child managing the expectations of adults around him. The quieter, more durable kind. The happiness of a person who had a place to be and people who showed up and a framework for the world that was honest about its dangers and generous about its possibilities. He was not rescued. He had never been rescued. He had been loved, imperfectly, expensively, by people who made mistakes and corrected them and stayed and chose him over and over in the specific daily way that love was not a feeling but a practice. He had been loved. That was enough to build on. That was, Naomi had come to believe, everything. The Saturday that the story ends was in February. Cold, the way February was cold in this city. The specific cold that had given up trying to be interesting and was just doing its job. A clear sky. The particular quality of winter light that made the city look cleaned, the edges of everything more defined. The 3 of them were going somewhere together. This was not unusual. It had become, over 2 years, a natural configuration. Not performed family, not the self-conscious arrangement of people who were trying to be something for public consumption. Just the 3 of them going somewhere, the way people who belonged to each other went places. Leo had chosen the subway. Of course he had. They took the A train. Leo stood at the platform edge. Not too close, but at the precise distance he had determined years ago was the optimal position for seeing down the track and also maintaining appropriate safety margin, a calculation he had shared with Naomi in detail on more than one occasion. He was watching for the headlights. He always watched for the headlights. Junwoo stood beside him. Naomi stood on Leo's other side. The platform was doing what platforms did. Filling and emptying in the rhythm of the transit system, strangers briefly sharing the specific transient intimacy of people waiting for the same thing. Leo turned his head to look at something down the platform, a new advertisement on the wall, which he assessed with the evaluative attention he brought to anything posted in subway stations, and in the turning, he reached up without looking and took Junwoo's hand. The gesture was as easy and habitual and utterly unremarkable as it had always been. Junwoo's grip closed around it. Leo turned back, satisfied with his assessment of the advertisement, and looked down the track for the headlights. He said, "You know what I've been thinking about." Naomi said, "What?" He said, "The whole city is connected. Like every single neighborhood, every part of it, no matter how different or far apart, there's a route. There's always a route. You just have to know where to look." Junwoo looked at him. Leo said, "I think that's the most important thing about the subway. Not the speed or the efficiency or any of that. Just that. That nothing is actually disconnected if you understand the system." A pause. The headlights appeared at the far end of the tunnel. The familiar wind that preceded the train moved through the platform, lifting jackets and hair and the edge of a newspaper someone was holding. Leo watched the train come. He said, without turning, still watching the light grow, "You don't have to fight any more, Dad." Junwoo looked at him. Leo turned then. He looked at his father with the direct, complete, entirely unguarded look he had, the one that had no performance in it, no management, no distance. Just Leo looking at the person he had chosen and been chosen by, The person who had crouched down on a subway platform 8 years ago and checked his hands before he did anything else. He said, "You did what you did and now you're doing this. The foundation. The right way." Naomi says that's how it works. You do the thing and then you deal with the thing and then you do better. He paused. "You're doing better." Junwoo said, "I'm trying." Leo said, "I know." A pause. That's the part that matters. The train arrived. The doors opened. The platform moved with the specific organized surge of people who knew where they were going. Naomi did not move immediately. She stood for a moment looking at the two of them, the man and the boy, the father and the son, the Korean crime boss who had dismantled himself in the name of a child, and the child who had looked at his father at the bottom of the worst days and said, "I know you're better than this. I believe you can be better than this. I am not going anywhere." She thought about a subway platform 2 years ago. A granola bar in her pocket, and a boy sitting too still, and the granola bar in her pocket, and a specific, clear, entirely unreasonable decision to stay. She thought, if I had gotten on the next train. She thought, but I didn't. Leo looked back at her from the doorway. He said, "Naomi, come on." She came on. The three of them stepped onto the train. The doors closed behind them. The platform moved away. The city pressed in on all sides, enormous and indifferent and full of people going somewhere, and the train carried them through the dark of the tunnel toward the light of the next station. Leo looked up at the route map above the door. He looked at the stops ahead. He looked at the car around them with the calm, satisfied expression of someone who understood the system and was comfortable inside it. He said, 7 stops. Naomi said, 7. He said, "I'll tell you the exits when we get there." She said, "I know you will." He grinned. Not the managed, careful small smile of a child who had learned to take up less space. The full one. The unguarded, easy, expensive one that cost him nothing because he was, right now, in this specific moment on this specific train, safe enough to spend it. Junwoo looked at his son. And the train moved through the dark. And they were all exactly where they were supposed to be. Now here is what this story was always about. It was not about crime or danger or the mechanics of how empires were built and dismantled. It was not about the network or the investigation or the careful legal proceedings that eventually produced the outcomes they produced. It was about this, a woman who chose to stay when she could have left. A man who chose to become something different when the thing he had been was no longer the right thing. A boy who looked at the adults around him and told them the truth about what he needed and trusted that the truth would be received. It was about the difference between protection and presence, between systems and love, between the architecture of safety and the harder, less manageable, infinitely more important work of simply being there. It was about what happens when you stop trying to fix the people you love and start trusting that they are capable of the better version of themselves. When you stop managing outcomes and start inhabiting the moment. When you stop running from the grief that has no ceremony and let it sit on the table in a room where it can finally be seen. Leo Bennett Park. He had added both names the year after, quietly, without drama, because he said it made sense and he wanted the record to reflect what was true, would grow up with all of this. He would carry the subway maps and the exit strategies and the carefully maintained awareness that the world had gaps and that knowing where the exits were was always better than not knowing. He would also carry this, a father who crouched down before he did anything else. A woman who sat on the floor and stayed. A mother who carried a photograph for 7 years and was still looking. 3 adults who made mistakes and chose him and chose differently and built something real in the rubble of everything they had to tear down first. He would carry all of it. And it would make him, when his time came to choose who to be, someone who understood that strength was not the same as force. That love was not the same as control. That the most powerful thing any person could do was choose presence when every other option was available. That was the lesson. Not a comfortable one. Not a simple one. The kind of lesson that cost something to learn and something to keep. The kind that was worth every single bit of it. That is the end of this story. But if you have made it here, if you have traveled all the way with Naomi and Junwoo and Leo and soon he through every high and every low and every moment that cracked something open and every moment that began to put it back together, then you already understand what this story was giving you. It was giving you permission. Permission to stay in the hard room. Permission to say the true thing. Permission to dismantle the thing you built when it stops being right, even when dismantling it costs you relationships and comfort and the version of yourself you had gotten used to. Permission to sit on the floor and not make it a lesson. Permission to choose better. Not perfectly. Not once and forever. But today, in this specific moment, with this specific person, with a full awareness of your own patterns and your own history and your own capacity for getting it wrong. Better. That is enough. That has always been enough. If this story moved you, if it landed somewhere real, do not keep it to yourself. Share it right now with someone who is sitting in a hard room and needs to know that staying in it is worth something. Someone who loves a child and is trying to figure out what protection really means. Someone who has been carrying a grief with no ceremony for longer than they should have had to. This story is for them. Has always been for them. Thank you for watching Afro Korean Tales and Stories. If this story stayed with you, there are more waiting here. Subscribe to Afro Korean Tales and Stories for a love that crosses cultures and lingers. Tell us in the comments, what emotion are you leaving this story with?